Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Despite the fact I've done this channel for 5 years, I've always done exactly the same setup. So it's straight on camera, background behind me. So this is a new thing for me over a 5-year period, but I thought it would be nice to do something a little bit different today. One of the questions I get asked the most by people like you watching is, what are the books that are behind me when I'm filming? So I thought it'd be a great opportunity today for me to just go through some of these books and hopefully give you some recommendations to some stuff to read, and some of the things that I get out of reading books. You know, music books, it's a different way of consuming knowledge about music, and there are certain books I like the way that they approach the subject and certain books that I don't. So I thought it would be good to have a chat about that today. This video isn't meant as an exhaustive list of the greatest books ever written about music. This is just the stuff that I've got behind me that I think might be of interest. I've gotten a lot out of some of these books, less so out of others, so I thought it would be a chance for us to have a bit of a back and forth about it. And if there's any stuff that you think I should have on my bookshelf, then just, you know, let me know in the comments section below. For example, so David Byrne's How Music Works isn't here, even though it probably should be. Alex Ross's The Rest Is Noise, which is this huge tome about 20th century music, and it took me forever to get through. That's not here either. So it's not about that, it's just about what's here, what I get out of it, and hopefully you might get something out of some of these books as well. So I'm actually going to start off with the most recent book that I bought on music. I bought this a couple of days ago, and J.R. Moore's Electric Wizards, A Tapestry of Heavy Music. So I actually have only gotten through maybe about 100 pages of this so far, but it's fantastic. You know, J.R. Moore's has really gone to lengths to try and detail the rise of heavy music, what it means, you know, how to distill what heaviness means. In the introduction he talks about that a lot, and we sort of start with the Beatles because that is actually where heavy music starts. That's his whole hypothesis, and we go through to Black Sabbath, and then it eventually pushes through to bands like Earth and Sleep. So really great. I think he's done a fantastic job, and one of the best things about it is he's actually really funny as well. You know, there's some really funny turns of phrase in here. He evokes, he references Bill Bailey's Part Trolls stand up at one point in quite a funny way. You know, so he's intensely readable, and I really like that because I think sometimes heavily analytical books are can be quite a slog to get through. I think they have their place, but they're not always as readable as perhaps we'd like them to be. This is so readable even 100 pages in, and I'm sure the rest of it is as well, so I can't wait to continue with that book. Absolutely recommend it. Just to note as well, I'm probably going to go through some of these in a random order, so by the end of this video all the books are going to be a reet mess. So Another Green World by Geeta Dale. This is one of the 33 1/3 music books. You've probably seen these. There's, I think, hundreds of them at this point. This is number 67. Nice little pocket books, readable. I think this is about 100 pages long. Geeta Dale is actually a Wire writer. She writes for Wire magazine, a brilliant music magazine about underground music. If you've never read it before, absolutely check it out, or check out their website. Usually comes with little tapper CDs every quarter as well, which will give you a really nice flavour of music you may not have ever listened to before. I have a slight issue with some of the 33 1/3 books that I picked up, where they sort of read like fangasms of a certain record. It doesn't really entice me for 100 pages. I don't really want to read 100 pages about why someone loves a record so much. It's just a bit much, you know. Whereas what Geeta does is she takes a couple of different, one of the things she looked at doing in her introduction, she talks about it, is using Brian Eno's oblique strategies cards to try and get through the writing process for this book, which is really interesting because she's taking one of the strategies of the composer of the record she's talking about, and using that to construct the book about the record. I mean, if you haven't ever listened to Eno's Another Green World, it is, you know, one of the greatest records ever made. It's a masterpiece, and Geeta manages to talk about why it's so special without ever kind of being over the top fanny about it, which I really appreciated. So yeah, worth checking this series out, but maybe read the first few pages if you're going to pick one up, just to make sure you like the style that they're going with, because it does vary quite wildly. Now, this is one that I used loads when I was doing my Miles Davis guides. I pretty much lived off of this. It's actually got a couple of different bookmarks in it as well. Ted Gioa's The History of Jazz. I don't know if Gioa is how you say his surname. Pretty sure I'm not saying that correctly. This thing is exhaustive. Unlike the kind of readableness of Electric Wizards, this is much more of like an encyclopedia. So I don't really read this cover to cover. I dip in, find a record I want to listen to, read about it, dip out and go and listen to it. So that's how I've always approached this. As such, it's getting more and more sort of dog-eared over the years because I like it so much. Anyone who's got even a little bit interest in jazz needs this book. I think this is the greatest book on jazz I've ever picked up because you get so much out of it. It does go right from the beginning roots of the 20s right the way up to kind of the Miles Davis late period. And it doesn't just focus on someone like Miles Davis. You get, you know, all sorts of the greatest players in this kind of varied and wild genre. People like Pat Metheny as well, and, you know, so we go into the fusion side of things. So yeah, a wonderful piece of work. I couldn't recommend that book enough, quite frankly. I've never actually read this book before, and this is fairly common on my bookshelves. Yeah, as I said, I've got tons of bookshelves out there, 3 bookshelves, and I haven't read everything because part of what I love about reading books is actually buying books as well. So it'll mean that I might pick up 5 or 6 books from the shop and maybe read 2 of them. So there's a few books on here that I haven't got around to reading yet, but I absolutely intend to. So this is Val Wilmer's As Serious as Your Life. So it's Black Music and the Free Jazz Revolution, 57 to 77. As much as I love this book so much, I always wanted it to go more into those 20 years where it starts getting a little bit more experimental, and I'm hoping that this is exactly what this book does. So you got a lot more about Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, Sun Ra. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that, and I'm sure it'll be a fascinating read. It's even got some nice photos in there as well. Always like that in the centerfold of a book. Yeah, looking forward to reading that a lot. Right, where do we start now? It's just so many books, isn't there? Well, we'll do these 2 in one fell swoop. These, I mean, I lived off of these 2 books when I was doing the Miles Davis guides, the 2 videos that nearly killed me, quite frankly. It was a pretty intense thing to write and research. Miles Davis, the definitive biography by Ian Carr, it is widely thought of as the definitive biography of Miles Davis's work. It is, I mean, so there's a lot of bookmarks in that where I've gone through, but I mean, it's like nearly 600 pages long. I learned more about Miles than I would have on a website or Wikipedia or wherever else you might go for your information. That is the way to find out a lot about him. It's not perhaps the most readable book. It's very long and there's a lot to it. So I picked it up kind of chapter by chapter. Wrote a little bit of my book, and my book didn't write a book. Wrote a little bit of my video, then went back to the book again. I think that was the best way to approach that. Really, it is really fascinating though. I would absolutely recommend that if you've got a big interest in Miles. But actually, now this is a point I want to make anyway, Miles's autobiography. If you want to get into the mind of a musician, and when you listen to their music next, really feel like you know something about them, the best possible way to do that is read their autobiography. Now, the best autobiographies on musicians and anyone really, they're not just talking about the music and their craft, their art. They're talking about their everyday life. They're talking about relationships they've made, lessons they've learned along the way. And by finding out and learning about the stuff that these musicians and artists have gone through, you learn so much more about their music than you ever would. So Miles goes off on loads of crazy stories about the stuff he got up to in New York and New Orleans and all these other places. And I learned more about him from that than perhaps I ever even could from Ian Carr's biography, because actually this is written by the man himself. And yeah, there may be embellishments in there and all those sorts of things, but it gives you such a vivid and colourful picture of who this man was and why he was so special. So yeah, if you're going to read something like Ian Carr's biography, you've also got to read Miles's autobiography, and just some of the players that he worked with and some of the things he's got to say about people like Charles Mingus. I think he calls him one mad motherfucker. I think I referred to that in my Miles Davis video. Yeah, I mean, Miles Davis, innit? Factory Records, the story of the record label by Mick Middles. Mick Middles comes up quite a lot. He's a pretty famed writer on music, and he also wrote The Fall. Well, he actually wrote that with Marquis Smith as well. I mean, Factory Records is one of the most interesting births of a record label, Manchester post-punk, and kind of how it came up with Tony Wilson, and then how it kind of just sort of disappeared in the 90s. And it is a really fascinating look on a record label, and there's not that many books out there on a specific label. You know, there's a few out there, but Factory is kind of one of the most important, and one that you should absolutely get into if you want to read about not just how a label was created, but, you know, Joy Division coming out of it, and that whole brand new style of music, that whole kind of ethos. And it is such an interesting look. Also, yellow books, they just look great, don't they? Speaking of Joy Division, Deborah Curtis's autobiography, writing about Ian Curtis and Joy Division, so Ian's wife. Quite a dark, difficult read, actually, because you've got, you know, Deborah Curtis and her and Ian's child being left behind by him after he took his own life, and her kind of coming to terms with that. And in that way, you learn a lot about Ian, because it's someone who was closest to him, but also someone who felt quite far away from him as well, and someone who was almost unreachable and felt quite lost. And you know, if you listen to Joy Division and you read the lyricism of Joy Division, Ian's lyrics, then you can see that. But yeah, that's a biography that might be quite a difficult read, but a really important one. Before we move on to the rest of these as well, so yeah, as I said, Mick Middles wrote The Fall with Mark E. Smith, and so they worked together. So I've never read this all the way through. I got pretty obsessed with The Fall for a good while, and there's a lot of lyrics in here as well. So yeah, I've sort of dipped in and out to find things out about The Fall. The main way I learnt about The Fall, going back on biographies once again, is Renegade. So I actually struggled with this book a little bit. There's a couple of different things written on here: a riot, unbeatable, vicious, hilarious. I mean, they all kind of do it justice. You know, Mark E. Smith is a pretty difficult character in a lot of ways. Hard to work with, booted out a lot of bandmates, you know, put a lot of noses out of joint. You know, he was who he was, and you get to hear it from the horse's mouth from this. And he kind of knew he was a bit of a bastard, basically, and that comes across. But at times, you know, he does things and talks about things, or things that he's done. You think, God, you really were a bit of a bastard, weren't you? A genius, but a bastard nonetheless. So yeah, I sort of struggled through it, but I did find it really interesting. But he is someone who you know, is almost like an unreliable narrator. You're not always sure what to believe, and how much he's playing up to this formidable reputation that he's built over the years of being a bit of a bastard. So I did find that interesting. The Fall is one of those artists that I think a lot of people struggle to get into anyway, because there's just so much music. So which is, again, why I bought this book as well, see if I can kind of penetrate it a bit more. I don't know if Renegade necessarily did the job of penetrating The Fall. I think it actually takes years of listening to the band and getting engrossed into their records and Mark E. Smith's musings to actually get to a point where you understand them. Maybe you needed to grow up with them, and obviously, me being the age I am, I'm 30 next year, The Fall had kind of long been cemented into the post-punk greats by the time I'd started being seriously interested in music. So hopefully The Fall with Mick Middles will also help me do that if I dip into it a little bit more. But yeah, if you've struggled to get into The Fall as well, let me know, because I know it's something that some people have talked about before in the comment sections of the channel. I would argue this is probably the best autobiography on music I've ever read. Kim Gordon's Girl in a Band, so obviously Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth. Kim talks about how Sonic Youth got together, you know, the kind of wild fame and success that they never really expected coming out of that New York tail end of the no wave scene, you know, where bands like Swans were starting to come out of that as well, watching bands like Suicide play and things like that. It's really interesting. Also, obviously, talks about the dissolution of her and Thurston Moore's relationship as well, and how difficult that is, and almost finding her own artistic individuality out of the death of Sonic Youth. Also, Orange Book, love an Orange Book as well. I read this, I think, in the space of about 2 days, and each day I walked to work, I was walking with my head down, reading, nearly walking into dog walkers on the route to work. That's how engrossing this was. Can't recommend it enough. David Toop's Ocean of Sound is, you notice how I'm moving this every time, just so these don't all topple over. This is kind of one of those books that goes off on so many different tangents. You find yourself getting Wikipedia up and getting Google up and wanting to read into other things because he has so many different frames of reference. So yes, this is David Toop's Ocean of Sound, ambient sound and radical listening in the age of communication. And you get so much on the history of ambient music in this, to the point where you will feel very up on ambient music when you finished it. I mean, most of you will know, I think ambient was the third video I ever did on this channel. Ambient music is something that's very close to my heart. I like to talk about it a lot. I like to listen to it a lot. there's probably not a day goes by where I don't at some point chuck on an ambient piece of music. So David Toop has been pretty important in me understanding a lot of that as well. And, you know, going into where it started to where it is now, or where it was when this book was released, I think this is maybe a reprint with a new introduction. It's one of those ones that people talk about a lot, and it you know, you start reading it and you'll understand why. Read this book. This is an interesting one. Greg Milner, I think this may have been one of the first, there we go, it fell. One of the first books on music that I ever picked up. It's looking a bit old now, but the story of recorded music, so Perfecting Sound Forever by Greg Milner. It really goes into sound technology, something that I think probably was going over my head quite a lot. But the way that Greg writes is pretty friendly, it's pretty informative, it's not too geeky that it's going to turn you off if you don't have much of an understanding. I think he understands that some people may struggle to grasp some of the concepts of it, and so actually starting from right at the beginning of the history of recorded music right up to now into the digital age, yeah, great, really interesting stuff. I'm running out of space for all these books now. I haven't actually read this, so the KLF, Chaos Magic and the Band Who Burned £1 Million by John Higgs. What a title, for one thing. If you're not excited by that title, then nothing is going to excite you. The reason I picked this up is I'm always fascinated by the KLF anyway. Look them up if you've never heard about them before. Bit of a wild history for a band. John Higgs, what a fascinating writer. He's done a load of books on William Blake. He's done a couple now. It's a really tiny pamphlet, and I've got it somewhere in the other room, which is about William Blake and his importance now in the 21st century, and really got me into William Blake in a big way just by reading this little 50-page book. So much so that I thought, well, if I want to learn about the KLF and get more into the KLF, John Higgs is the best person to do it. I will let you guys know once I've read this, but it's going to be coming up, I think, on my reading list because, yeah, it's fascinating. Another yellow book as well. Just really got a thing for yellow books. David Bowie by Dylan Jones. So there's a lot of books on David Bowie, as you would expect, being one of the most important cultural icons ever. I used this a lot when I created my 2 Bowie guides back in late 2016, early 2017. At least I think I did anyway. It was such a long time ago now, I almost do not remember. So actually I may have picked this one up after. I think I had an older copy of this. This looks like a newer copy. That's another thing, if there's books that I've kind of read that fall apart, I will often just kind of pass them on and then get a fresh copy that I can actually read. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty weighty tome, all about Bowie's life. And you know, if you want to learn about the man, that's a good way to do it. I didn't find Dylan Jones's writing quite as readable as some of the other histories of music that I have read in the past. Nevertheless, obviously some really interesting things in there. And I would always say that if you want to learn about an artist, don't just go on Wikipedia and read what someone's written on there, which is often just like taking stuff that millions of other people have said and regurgitating it. You know, someone's gone to the efforts of really researching somebody in a big way. You know, spend £6, or you know, get like a cheap audio book of it, or something like that, or a digital book. But you know, just you know, there's so many great writings out there on people that you probably love, and sometimes Wikipedia ain't really going to give you what you need. So look up stuff like this. Speaking of which, Mark Blake's Pigs Might Fly, the inside story of Pink Floyd. Again, lots of books on Pink Floyd out there. This one is regarded as one of the better ones. And, you know, I learned a lot. You know, I got massively obsessed with animals once I'd read this book. Front cover of Animals. Interestingly, if you go past this now, which is Battersea Power Station, that is now very expensive flats. It's been incredibly gentrified, so it doesn't look quite the same anymore. But yeah, I think, you know, I found this really interesting. Look into Pink Floyd, again, a band with a massive discography, lots to get into. Yeah, so you like Pink Floyd, you should probably read it. Nick Cave, The Complete Lyrics. So this is you can get much newer versions of this book now. It's been printed and reprinted a lot of times. This is lyrics to 1978 to 2001. So, you know, we're missing out on a lot of late Nick Cave records. I think the most recent one probably goes all the way up to Skeleton Tree, I think. But yeah, it does what it says on the tin. It is all of Nick Cave's lyrics, right the way from Birthday Party all the way to 2001. And, you know, I think Nick Cave is a poetic genius. I've been obsessed with him for a very long time. And sometimes there's nothing better than chucking on a record and reading the lyrics like this, and really getting into the lyricism and the stories, you know, especially a record like Murder Ballads, which is story after story. It's great to read along whilst you listen to Nick proselytizing about kind of death and destruction, and you know, that's quite a funny record as well. Apparently this is a Banksy. I didn't even know Nick Cave had a Banksy made of him, but on the back it says Banksy, so there you go. Listen to this by Alex Ross. So this is really interesting. So I spoken about, at the beginning of this video, I spoke about The Rest Is Noise, which is his book all about the 20th century of music and kind of how wild the 20th century actually is when you think about how much music and how much movement, how much music moved forward in that 100 years alone. It's pretty crazy stuff. With this, he goes even more all over the place. So he will talk about, as it says in the back, he talks about Brahms and kind of the beauty of listening to a Brahms all the way up to Björk and Radiohead. And really, he is one of those loved writers because he writes about music in a way that is infectious. And once you listen to him talking about a certain type of music, you can't but help go and find that music, stick it on and listen to it. And that infectious enthusiasm for a certain type of music is exactly what you want in a music writer, which is, I think, why Alex is considered one of the best. Going back onto autobiographies, Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. Most of you will know, if you've watched videos of me before, that Bruce is one of my favourite musicians. I think there's so much honesty in his writing, and you can't help but love a record like Darkness on the Edge of Town. For me, it just has that kind of like brash, blue collar, just amazing middle America 70s vibe to it. And you know, there's no better way of learning about how he got to that style of music than hearing it from the boss himself. The funny thing is, he's also quite kind of he's not self-aggrandizing particularly. He's got a bit of a sense of humor, and he doesn't mind putting himself down in a fairly comedic way, and I like that, and that honesty really comes through across this whole autobiography. Once again, an autobiography, that's a really great way of getting into an artist if they've written one. I'm not saying go and read Slash's autobiography. I've never read it. I don't know if it's good or not. Maybe it is, I don't know. But then, you know, if it's a good autobiography, then such as Bruce's, you will learn so much about him. And why he writes the way he does, and because of his past experiences and his family life and the early success, and actually scrambling to get successful in the first place. This is really a bit of a mess now, isn't it? Again, another one I haven't read yet, Billie Holiday's Lady Sings the Blues. I've heard so much about this autobiography, relatively short, but Billie talking about, you know, how she was scrubbing floors and running errands in a brothel before singing in Harlem. You know, that just sounds, you know, so fascinating, and how she becomes, you know, one of the most important jazz icons of all time. Not just jazz icons, but icons of all time. I'm really looking forward to reading this. Again, I'll let you know once I've read it, you know what I think, but yeah, I'm so excited to read that one. I actually can't really see what I'm doing. Oh, a book, there we go. So Oliver Saxs' Musicophilia. So this is a much more scientific, medical look at music, so very different to everything else that's on this bookshelf. This is one that I've delved into quite a few times, but never got on all the way through. I don't know why. Sometimes I'm a little bit fickle with books and I put them down, pick something else up. But really, he talks about, you know, the power of music as part of the human condition. And, you know, if we really break music down, the connection we have to tonality and harmony, and why we feel the way we feel, and how music can change our way of thinking, and what music can do. Basically, the power of music. That is much of what this book is about. But I'm not going to profess to know it back to front, because, as I say, I've only read it sort of part the way through a few times. So I should add it to the to-be-read pile once again. Let's go this way now, because we're starting to get to the end of all these books. It's going to fall over. Harry Sword's Monolithic Undertow in Search of Sonic Oblivion. I bought this about not long after it came out. Essentially, the history of drone music. Really exhaustive, going all the way from beginning to end. He talks about, I mean, just listen to some of the artists on the back, which will give you a flavour of where he takes things. The master musicians of Jujuka, the Beatles, which in fact was J.R. Moore's beginning of Electric Wizards as well. You've got Terry Riley, the Velvet Underground, Nico, Ashra Temple going into krautrock stages with Popol Vuh, Hawkwind, and then we go Sonic Youth, Swans, Black Sabbath, Electric Wizard, again, artists that J.R. Moores talks about, Melvin's Earth, Sun, Brian Eno, Coil, Godflesh. I mean, the great thing about this book, and in spite of being just one of the most beautifully printed books ever, I mean, look at that. That is something special. Harry clearly has a huge love for this music, and talking about the power of the drone, like what we mean by that, and the fact that there are drones surrounding us in different ways. Your fridge is a drone, and what that effect has on you. Talks about a bit of that in the beginning of the book. But what I love mostly about it is he talks about his connection with the music as well. So he talks about going to Roadburn Festival, a heavy music festival in the Netherlands, I think it is, and what it's like standing there with pummeling amps facing you, nearly blowing your eardrums out, and the power of that incessant, insistent sound. Quite poetically written in a lot of ways as well. I mean, I really do think it's a pretty special book. I feel like I'm going to have the same sort of connection with Electric Wizards to what I had with this book. I would absolutely recommend this. Follow Harry on Twitter as well. He's pretty funny and often gives recommendations for music and all sorts. So yeah, a really great book. Also, White Rabbit Books is an imprint which has been putting out some fantastic books of late. They're putting out Bobby Gillespie's Tenement Kid, so Primal Scream Singer's autobiography. There's some fiction books written by David Keenan as well, which are brilliant. So yeah, if you want to have a look at you want to support a really great independent publishing arm, you need to support White Rabbits. Great independent book company, and they're publishing some fantastic stuff at the moment. This one again is one that I've dipped in and out of, which I used actually quite a lot for the Tom Waits video I did. I don't know how many years ago now. Tom Waits, the elusive Tom Waits. Who knows what the man's doing, what the man's thinking. This is Interviews and Encounters, edited by Paul Meagher Jr. So this again, does what it says on the tin. There are so many interviews with him at different stages of his life. And some of the interviews, so for example, he's interviewed by Jim Jarmusch at one point, the director who has actually directed Tom in a couple of different films. Including Down by Law, which is one of my favourite films of all time. Really, there's you're not gonna. Tom isn't the sort of person who's ever going to write an autobiography. I don't think he's not the sort of person who's going to give away his elusive nature that easily. So this is probably the best you're going to get about learning about Tom Waits as a person. I would recommend it if you want something to dip in and out of. I probably wouldn't sit and read 450 pages of interviews. That sounds pretty exhausting, but something to dip in and out of when you want to learn a bit more about him from a specific era. Absolutely check that out. Humour by Stanley Donwood. This isn't really a music book. Stanley Donwood is the artist who does all of the artwork for Radiohead, and this is a collection of short stories that he did. I mainly have that on my shelf because it looks so beautiful. I love Stanley's artwork, as I'm sure most of you will, or many of you will. He's got such a fascinating, disjointed way of writing short stories, and somehow it's ended up on the music bookshelf. There you go. Ghost of My Life by Mark Fisher. So writings on depression, hauntology, and lost futures. Mark Fisher, for those of you who don't know, is probably one of the most important cultural writers for popular music and popular culture we've ever had. Incredible. Really sadly took his life a couple of years ago. Left behind a wealth of incredible writings and musings on popular culture. He had a blog called K-Punk, which was really widely regarded. He wrote for Wire magazine. He did lectures. He was fantastic. So I'd widely recommend you checking out all of his writings. But this one specifically, Ghost of My Life, hauntology and vaporwave he talks a lot about. He writes in a way where, again, I was talking about it in one of these other myriad books, I can't remember now, but he has so many different cultural markers and points that you just find yourself wanting to consume everything he's talking about. So you'll find yourself going, okay, I'll make a note of this, I'll make a note of that. That was all the way through this book. I did that. Just such a fascinating way of writing. So sad that we've lost him so early, because such a special person. Read that book, please. So, Into the Never, 9 Inch Nails and the Creation of the Downward Spiral by Adam Steiner. Actually kind enough that Adam sent me a copy of this for free to read, which I really appreciate. It was so nice of him to do. And I have used it in my writing of the 9 Inch Nails guide, which has now been in development hell for bloody long time. Hopefully out soon. What's great about Adam's writing is he takes one record, The Downward Spiral, and he goes in on it. You know, he is scholarly with what he's writing about. If you want to really get into, if you want to learn everything there is to know about The Downward Spiral as a record, Adam knows about it, and it's in this book. And it is great to read someone with such a scholarly approach to music. And this man seriously knows this record. There's been a few different books on Nine Inch Nails, but it's great to see more writers tackling Trent, and I hope we see more of it as well, because actually look at the legacy Nine Inch Nails are creating. It's just mad, from you know, the 90s, from stuff like The Downward Spiral to The Fragile, to the scores and stuff they do now for Pixar, you know, for Soul, stuff like that. It's so much to write about, so I hope more writers tackle it, really. Under the Ivy, The Life and Music of Kate Bush by Graham Thompson. Haven't read this. Not gonna lie, I haven't read it at all. This, I got to do a Kate Bush guide, which I haven't got around to doing yet, and I felt, despite the fact I've listened to most of Kate Bush's records, I really wanted to get a bit more into the way she works, her mind works, and some of the backgrounds on the records. This is a massive book. So I do need to get around to reading this at some point, because I would like to do. I think I promised the Kate Bush guide again about 4 years ago, so I should probably read it. Yeah, you know, it's Kate Bush. You know, what's not to like about it? I'm sure it's going to be an interesting read. Goodbye 20th Century. Sonic. Oh no, we've gone down. I knew this was going to happen. Just bear with me. Yeah, I think we're okay. Raw might be going there. Right. Before it all falls over. Yeah, it's Goodbye 20th Century, Sonic Youth and the Rise of the Alternative Nation by David Brown. Again, you know, I learnt so much from Kim Gordon's Girl in a Band about Sonic Youth, and I really scratched an itch, but I kind of wanted to learn even more about them. Sonic Youth are one of the greatest rock bands ever, in my opinion. Just incredible, and if you've never listened to their music, what the hell are you doing? Go and listen to them. This is a much more in-depth look at Sonic Youth. This is a right beaten up book. I've kind of delved into this a number of times and read bits and bobs here and there. Lee Ronaldo and Thurston Moore, Kim Gordon. You know, one of those books. I like to pick up books by bands, and I might not always read them cover to cover, but to dip in and find out more about them. So similarly with this one, which is I imagine what I'll end up doing, Sonic Youth. Oh, this book. Oh dear. God, how am I ever going to clean all this up? England's Hidden Reverse by David Keenan. Now, David Keenan started out as a music writer, Scottish writer he is, but actually he writes incredible literature now. So I've actually got a couple of his books here somewhere. Exterbeth by David Keenan, an imprint, and White Rabbit Books that published Monolithic Undertow. That's an amazing bit of fiction. I couldn't recommend it enough, as is For the Good Times, about the IRA. He's a great fiction writer, one of the most interesting modern voices in literature we have. So this is a bit of a tome all about Coil, Current 93 and Nurse with Wounds. So basically it's what he calls a secret history of the esoteric underground. This book was so hard to find. It's out of print now. I think I had to pay about 35 quid for it on Abe Books or something. It was really difficult to find. It's beautiful. There's so many beautiful photos in here. I haven't got around to reading this again yet. This is another one I haven't read yet. But I want to learn so much more about bands like Coil, who have such a long and storied history, and their music is second to none. Fascinating. And how these three bands intertwined as well, which is something that those that haven't listened to them might not know. Oh, it's from Blackwell's. There you go. Blackwell's is a great bookshop in Oxford. If you can get your hands on this book, then I would recommend it. If you see it for about 20 quid, jump on it straight away, because I can't wait to learn about these bands a lot more. Hopefully it'll get a reprint at some point. Maybe White Rabbit might be able to reprint it. Who knows? Oh, this isn't a music book anyway. This is just a book on, you know, graphic design, which I guess is handy. Raw, My Journey into the Wu-Tang, by Lamont Ugod Hawkins. Again, I bought this at the same time as I bought another one of these books I haven't read yet. Essentially, supposedly one of the most interesting inside story writings on Wu-Tang and their legacy from New York. Can't wait to read that. I feel like a bit of a letdown because the last three books I've talked about I haven't actually read. So you'll probably go, why are you telling us about books you haven't even read? It's a good point. I have no defense for this, basically. It is yellow though, again, loving a yellow book. Anyway, I hope that was of interest to you somehow. I hope you might decide to read some of these books. There's some really fascinating things there. Maybe you've read some of the books I've bought and put on this shelf and haven't read yet, and you can tell me what you thought of them. I'll be back soon. I've got a couple of videos that I've almost finished writing. My 5 albums to get you into Riot Girl, which I'm really excited to get out there. Also an entry points video on Frank Zappa, and maybe picking about 5 records that I think you should start with if you've never listened to any Zappa before. And of course, a guide to 9 Inch Nails, which at this point is like a ton of bricks around my neck. We'll get it done though, absolutely. Thank you as always for supporting this channel as well. And I will be back really soon. Any ideas for videos you want to see, chuck it in the comments section. See you soon.